Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Liberty Show with Kevin Fortune. And you have tuned into a live broadcast of the Liberty Show if you're on Facebook. It's recorded if you're on YouTube. This is a national platform where you, the citizen, can raise your voice on all things of liberty, what you believe in, what you like. And tonight we have a really cool topic: government spending, something that evidently must be the biggest secret in the world because nobody's talking about it. Nobody wants to hear about it. Nobody wants to discuss it. The right nor the left want to talk about it. So tonight we're going to find out why nobody's talking about it. And we're going to hear from some of you around the country. So we're going to get started tonight. But before, I just want to remind everyone to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, hit the like button if you're watching us on YouTube. Also, make sure you subscribe. If you want to help sponsors, you can go to patreon.com/The Liberty Show, or you can go to our website, www.thelibertyshow.us. And to get us started tonight, we have a good friend of ours from the Liberty Show, Mr. Alan Buckley from outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Alan, you're on the Liberty Show. What do you have to say about all this government spending?
Something I've learned in the last 4 months is I'm not a Democrat. All this spending, this finance mainly by debt, is eventually going to kill the country. In 2007, the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, said, quote, GAO's long-term simulations continue to show ever larger deficits, resulting in a federal debt burden that ultimately spirals out of control. And back then, the debt was under $9 trillion. Now it's over $28 trillion. Haven't balanced the budget since 2001. And things are just slowly going down the tubes. And it's all a function of too much spending relative to the amount of revenue. We typically bring in 15 to 20% of GDP in taxes and spend 20 to 25% of GDP in terms of spending. And you just get more and more debt. And the only reason we've been able to stomach it so far is because we were financially responsible for a number of years. But basically, since the turn of the century, we've been just a reckless country. And, we have about $22 trillion of public debt now. Why can't we go back to ordinary interest rates? Why just Jerome Powell said we're going to keep low interest rates for 3 years? Because if we went back to ordinary rates, we'd have insurrection, we'd have riots. A more typical treasury rate on average from 0 to 30 years is closer to 5%. If you take 5% of the total public debt of 22 or 23 trillion, you get $1 to $1.2 trillion. The largest tax revenue ever was 3.5 trillion. That was in 2019. So you start spending over 30 to 35% of your taxes on interest, and your system is going to collapse. Along with it, the stock market will go. And that's something that's potentially really, really catastrophic. The reason we've been able to do, a part of the reason we've been able to go on so long doing what we're doing, is we don't really have any competition. China doesn't have its financial house in order. The EU doesn't. And so as of right now, there is no major threat. But, there's only so long that we can continue doing this. There are ways to fix the problems, but they involve sacrifice. We could have a tax system that used flexible rates that were algebraically tied to spending, to force balanced budgets in good years. And we've had a lot of good years. 2019 was a good year. We raised $3.5 trillion in revenue and spent $4.5. No reason with the 50-year low in unemployment we shouldn't have balanced the budget that year. So, and that's when the Republicans controlled things. Now we've got Democrats who are even worse. So it's just a matter of which major party is going to drive the country to a financial collapse.
That's a real good point, Alan, that both parties do a lot of spending, and we want to blame the Democrats a little better at it. I think the Republicans are just sneakier at it, but they both have contributed to this debt crisis, and we need to bring that out. So we're going to move on. We're going to come back to you. Don't go anywhere. We're going to go to Patrick down in Florida, South Florida, the Sunshine State. Hey, Patrick, you're back on the Liberty Show.
Thank you, Kevin. Wanted to just ask the panel, does anyone have an idea why lumber prices are up 377%? Anyone hazard a guess? I can tell you why. It's because land and homes are one of the few places a typical American can safeguard financial liberty due to catastrophic inflation. And that's what we're staring down the barrel of. Government spending is out of control. A lot of it due to COVID. And one thing we know about the government, our government in particular, it creates a problem, spends our money for a solution, and that solution oftentimes leads to a predetermined outcome of their choosing. It's scary to think that way, but more times than not, that's what we're looking at. And you can look at two examples. First being immigration. We know that cheap labor benefits Republicans, and changing demographics benefit more votes potentially, benefits the Democrats. So what do? Well, they spend. We've got a constitution, we've got a border. So how do you get illegal immigrants into the country? Well, you spend money, and to do that through getting the money to NGOs to cloth, feed, and transport illegal immigrants to our border, and then a team of attorneys to keep them in the country. It's all through money. And a predetermined outcome is that now they've got illegal immigration for either cheap labor or potentially votes down the road. So that's a big part of why we're seeing so much spending, is because it's leading to an outcome that benefits our politicians. Second one, and Alan had kind of mentioned this in regards to China, where we're able to get away with what we've been getting away with because we've got no true global rival. Well, I disagree. I think our biggest global rival is China right now. And I'm going to tie that into what we're seeing with COVID-19 right now. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but it's looking more and more likely that a lab leak scenario was how the COVID-19 virus escaped. You're seeing PolitiFact debunked a story they had done last year, that theory was conspiracy. And even the former CDC director, Robert Redfield, said the virus likely escaped from virology lab in Wuhan, China. Now, the thing that I want to highlight here is that it's been revealed that our National Institute of Health, NIH, it's taxpayer funded, gave a substantial grant to an NGO called EcoHealth Alliance to fund Wuhan's lab research into bat coronavirus, which shares the same blueprint that the COVID-19 has. So I don't know about you all, but the potential hazards of unchecked spending, government spending, and wouldn't the paying for the R&D of a global rival's development to a potential bioweapon give Americans concern? I think it would. And you can look at the fallout what COVID-19 has caused. Is we've got over 600,000 Americans have died. Millions of Americans are out of jobs. Small businesses have closed their doors. Generation of kids getting left behind at school. Trillions of dollars spent to mortgage our future with the COVID relief bill. If you take a look at that mortgage, that COVID bill essentially is all being funded by China itself. So whether it's oversight, ineptitude, greed, COVID-19 was a problem, and it was a crisis exploited by our politicians. They spent historic amounts of taxpayer money as a bailout, so to speak. All it's done is left crippling inflation, historic debt, and a lot of Americans either at each other's throats over vaccines, masks. Many believe that the election is in question due to the mail-in ballots. So if you're looking for a way to destabilize our country, COVID-19, the whole deal would be a good place to start. So I think it can be quite nefarious what our politicians are doing with spending. And I'll tell you, between immigration and COVID-19, just as a couple of examples of what unchecked spending can do when we as Americans aren't really paying attention, the fallout is immeasurable. So that's what I wanted to discuss.
Well, let me ask you a question. I don't know if we're not paying attention, but we just don't want to do anything about it or talk about it. Why is that you think that, matter of fact, like now the Republicans are talking about it because Biden is doing it, but Trump and all the others, they've been spending too. That's how we got up to 22 trillion. So what do you think, being a conservative? Why do we only talk about it when it's the other party? Well,
no, I think that's one of Trump's biggest criticisms is he did spend a lot. He did not play the role of conservative in spending. And you look at right now, a lot of businesses are having a hard time finding people to work because the government is paying them more to stay home. So that's just going to increase spending. So I think you're right on the money, is that there is no excuse for what Trump spent. A lot of it, the early bill had to do with the military. He needed a lot of spending went into the military. And then when COVID came around, when you're in the moment and you've got a pandemic, it's hard to say no to spending. But if you look at that COVID bill that was last summer, I believe, the garbage that was packed into it, the politicians all got a pay raise. They were renovating some of the art centers up in the DC area. It was disgusting what they packed into that bill. It was far from a clean bill. So that's and the way that was done is if you didn't get those items in there, the Democrats weren't gonna pass it. and the Republicans were going to look like villains because they weren't giving help to the people that needed it. Our politicians are disgusting. And that was really the finest example I can think of, is where they were letting us starve, our businesses fail, our kids not going to school for pure politics. So you're right. It is inexcusable what they do. And I think we're so team oriented now, where you're either team Republican, team Democrat, that you're willing to look past the bad behavior just to feel better about yourself and your team. And it's not a good place to be as a country.
Well, I agree with you. And one thing I think you and Alan alluded to, but the fact of, you were talking about the military, and we had to do that spending. A lot of this is still just crony capitalism. We always find an excuse or reason to spend for the lobbyists or the corporations that donated to the lobbyists. Have you noticed that? We'll do big Pentagon spending when we've got Halliburton, and we've got, some of these other Lockheed Martin. We got a lot of these big companies behind it. And that's just really, really interesting. But thank you, Patrick. We're going to move on. Dr. Dana, you are expert on everything, being the philosophical, ideological brain of the panel. What do you think? Talk to us about government spending.
Well, I've been thinking about the Department of Defense, and what's inevitably going to happen is what happened a few years ago, which is they're going to try to cut defense spending, and they cut it across the board without being thoughtful about it. One of the problems we have currently is that everybody who has a project tries to spend money in all the congressional districts. They deliberately find sources for all kinds of things, not just big items, but all, small items as well that say go on an aircraft. And of course, the big thing, the F-35 is my big target. It's not a good aircraft. It was put together by committee, and Congressman Boehner profited from it because all the engines for the F-35 are built in his district. So that's an example of how the program managers have to gain political capital to do things. Now that doesn't mean that our management of military shouldn't cut those things, but it's tough decisions that go on. Now, the one thing I do urge is that funding for DARPA, particularly for artificial intelligence, needs to be increased. And the reason why is that we need to stay ahead of other countries, specifically the Chinese. The Chinese do a very good job of cherry picking all the technology that we do in the open, both commercial and from organizations like the National Science Foundation, which are open and fund mainly academic organizations. But DARPA is a little different. It doesn't have to do that. It can stay in the dark. It can have classified programs. And strangely enough, classified programs have some advantages. They are somewhat insulated from political influence. So those are two of my contributions. One is a cut, and the other is that how the funds are directed. And recently they did. There was a motion introduced to double the DARPA budget, and I'm all for that.
Well, those are some great points. And I think I like the one you were talking about, the technology and stuff. I think it's DARPA, because, common sense, we are going to have to spend some money, but I think we're spending it in so many of the wrong places. We do need to be spending money on technology, robotics, and, things like this. And we're way behind the rest of the world, Asia, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Indian. I mean, everybody, that's where they're going. And we're still talking about philosophy and, global warming, which might be an issue, but we're worried about so many other things, that's not even going to be pertinent in the future, So, but what I do have to ask you, right? Dr. Dana?
What was that?
Since you're a transgender, what about government spending for people with transgender surgeries and keeping them up in prison and jails with meds and hormones and all that good stuff?
Well, I've answered that question before. Most of the transgender payments are made by transgender people themselves or by insurance companies. And it's actually in the insurance company's interest to take care of transgender people, because if they don't, they're going to incur bills for things like medications for depression, attempted suicide attempts that they have to deal with. So it's really a net zero situation with regard to funding transgender people.
So does any public funding go for that? Like if they're in a prison or a county jail or whatever?
There's some public funding goes into, what is it? Not Medicare, but Medicaid.
Okay.
That funds those things, but the states regulate that to a great extent, and a lot of them don't allow it. But yeah, there is some money that goes to insurance and other kinds of things off of Medicaid.
Okay, I just had to throw that in since you're on our great expert. Okay, we are going to move on to David down in South Florida. David, this is you're back on the Liberty Show, your Liberty Show.
Oh, Kevin, I just get so depressed when I realize that government has no concept of what a budget is. You and I know we can't go a day if we don't balance our books and make sure we have enough money to fill up our tank of gas and get food on our table. Here they just as soon cut a pipeline and cut our job, cut our tax source down, keep grabbing a credit card that they never have to make a payment on. It makes me angry. I see red when I see them just waste. Nobody wants to shut the water faucet off. They just let it run until it just overflows. The next financial crisis will make 2009 look like a little drip. Well, that's all I can say. I'm just so frustrated.
Well, I agree with you. That's how I got into this whole liberty movement, and it's just the spending, the amount of spending, where it's spent at. But it's easy to spend somebody else's credit card because the taxpayers are paying for it. That's what gets me. And it used to be a time where politicians listened at their constituents, but they don't even listen to us now. They could care less if we're mad or we don't like it or disagree. But I blame us for continually to vote those same idiots back in. And
Kevin,
yes, go ahead.
Now, you said the taxpayers are paying for it. A lot of the problem is, to a large degree, they're not, because so much of the budget is borrowed. Last year was a pandemic year, but we brought in $3.4 trillion and spent almost double that. So half of it was paid by taxpayers. The other half was by debt. To keep adding to this debt, and look at the ramifications of the debt. They have to keep the Fed rate at zero. That's why they promised to keep it there for 3 years, because you can't go back to ordinary interest rates. And then you look at all the negatives that come from that. You can say, well, my house went up like crazy because mortgage rates are down to peanuts, which means a huge number of people can now afford a house that only a few people could afford before. But what else happens because of that? Bonds, which are a typical, long-term investment for a lot of investors, older people, companies, and insurance companies, blue chip bonds are paying under a 2% yield. Well, and they're super risky, because if rates do go up, they're going to lose principal value. So what's happened is you've taken one of the two major historically great investment vehicles, also for pension plans. Okay, pension plans need to get returns, and taken it away because the government is so broke, because it borrows so much to keep this sugar high going. And most spending is entitlements. And all the Democrats are doing now is they're attempting to just expand entitlements. I mean, this new child credit of $3,000 or $3,600 per kid, that's not paid for. You add up all the things, the stimulus payments, the unemployment, the expanded Obamacare. This is all just your traditional, slowly collapsing democracy due to loose fiscal policy. That's what happens. That's
But let
where
me
this
ask
is.
you something, Alan. Do you really
Go.
think that they care about these entitlement programs, or you think they're just trying to buy votes?
They care about them to keep votes. That's why they won't touch them, because, and Medicare and Social Security are by far the largest two spending programs. You know, people think, oh, the military is huge. It is huge, but it's not close to Medicare and Social Security combined. Social Security is over $1 trillion a year out of, 4 to 5 trillion, typically 4 to 5 trillion. And Medicare is just growing, and it's gonna surpass Social Security in the relatively near future. And there's no desire of any of the major party members to touch them, because they know it's a political disaster, and because all old people vote, and you want to touch their entitlements, they're not going to vote for you, so they don't even bring it up. So if you can't touch 60 to 70% of the budget, and as Dana was saying, you got to have a certain amount that goes into the military. We don't need 800 foreign military bases, that's for sure. But if you want to have a strong military, there's only so much you can cut that. And, but there is a tremendous amount of waste. But, we could go to a system where, and I have this on my former Senate website, where you use algebra to force balance budgets using tax rates that are tied to spending. And every year we're not in a recession or worse, we use that system. We could have used it in 2019 and balanced the budget. Yeah, we'd have a little bit less prosperity, but we'd have a system that would last indefinitely. And now we've got a system that is eventually going to collapse and take the stock market with it. Because if the United States becomes financially unstable, it's going to bring down markets across, it's going to bring down the whole world's financial system. That's just the reality. And that's where it's headed. And what's going to prevent it from happening sooner is that everybody is reliant on the U.S. system. And you got a lot of wealthy people around the world who invest in Apple and Google and, Ford Motor Company. And they don't want to see the U.S. system collapse because they're rich. A lot of Saudi Arabian sheiks and whatnot. I mean, they've got to invest in something. And, we've got a lot of good companies here that pay good dividends and, and that are attractive investments. So a lot of things are going to be done to try to keep the system going. And, why can they get away with paying 1% on a treasury note? Because 1% is better than zero. I mean, you could take your money and stick it in your mattress and get zero. Or you can buy a treasury note and get 1, a CD and get, somewhere between 0.5 and 1.5. And that's still better than getting nothing. And as inflation gets bad, and it's getting bad, everybody knows that, but they're still not going to touch interest rates because they're more afraid of the public going ballistic. If you actually had real substantive rate increases that actually hit the treasury note rate in a significant manner, even if treasury rates just went to 3%, 3% on 22 to 25 trillion of debt, you're talking 600-800 billion dollars of interest on, again, you're talking roughly 20 to 30% of revenue. You're going to a place where you're going to see people revolt, and if they revolt, the markets are going to collapse. If the markets collapse, you get into a downward spiral where people start selling off, and then the market goes down, and then you got all these old people, all these baby boomers going into retirement or in retirement. Their $1 million is now down to 800, so they spend less, and then when they spend less, it sends the economy in a recession, and then they spend even less, more. They even hold back more because they've got less. You could just see how it could downward spiral. So, the Fed is doing everything it can to support these two major political parties. And that's why they love Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell, because they are just Democratic team players. And at least in the past, Greenspan and Bernanke would criticize Congress. They'd say, we can do this for now, but you got to get your act together. And they haven't. And so these people are thrilled with Jerome Powell, who basically doesn't say anything negative about Congress, just promises prosperity now, which means I'm just going to keep interest rates at peanuts, keep creating money out of thin air to buy treasury notes and mortgage-backed securities, And by buying Treasury notes, they drive down the yield. And when they drive down the yield, two things happen when the Fed buys Treasury notes. You create more demand for the notes, which drives down the yield, which pushes down interest rates, which lowers the federal interest debt burden. But also, when the Fed owns those Treasuries, the interest goes from the Treasury to the Fed. It doesn't go out to the public. The Fed takes the interest and gives almost all of it back to the Treasury. So that keeps your interest rate your overall interest expense much lower than it really would be if third parties were loaning the money. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, okay. Some really great points there. We're going to be digesting that. We're going to go back to Patrick in South Florida has another comment, and then we're going to go to Tim up in Albany, Georgia. So Patrick, you're back on the Liberty Show.
Yeah, it was when Dr. Dana was discussing military investment and potentially investing more in Department of Defense and namely DARPA. It reminded me of some things I've been seeing a lot lately. Former Director of National Intelligence, John Radcliffe, he's on record, one of the network shows, saying that we're being encountered by, for lack of a better word, UFOs on a daily basis. Now, do I think these are space aliens? No. It's either technology that is top secret, or far worse, it's a rival nation that has technology that has leapfrogged us. So my thinking is despite all the spending, have we not been spending it in the right place? Are we now playing from behind here with rival nations that now have superior military technology? I don't know, but you've been seeing a lot of that lately, and people kind of laugh it off and say, "Oh, we're being invaded by space aliens." I don't think that's the case at all. But it does pose an important question: is are we the global power that we hope we are, or are other countries out there? Do they have some things that we don't understand that we can't account for? So just want to bring that to discussion. I find it interesting. We're hearing a lot about that lately.
Well, I agree with you, Patrick. And I'm very concerned right now about, what's going on, but I don't believe we're the world's keeper. We want a strong military to protect us, but going in and invading every country, get involved. I think Alan mentioned having 800 army bases around the world. I don't think that's our job. It's hard enough to protect your own family, take care. But, we want to get involved in Israel. We want to get involved in everybody, let them, battle it out. And if somebody lose, they lose. But we're going to change up a little bit before Tim, we got Miss Jackie. But first, we're going to have the Prince of Liberty has arrived. So Mr. Damon, he's going to come over and he's going to give his spiel. Welcome, Damon. You're back on the Liberty Show.
Appreciate you, Kevin. Thanks for everybody so far on the call. And when it comes to a conversation about the national debt, Alan Buckley, you've been a great voice as far as putting the numbers together, because I think people have a hard time grasping how exponential those numbers are, right? So when we talk about why the interest rates are so low, again, it's not because the government cares about the people. They care about what they would have to pay back, right? Because when you look at your savings account at the bank, you get 0.05%. I remember a few years back, 5% would be a good little interest rate at the bank. You could put your money in the bank and have a reasonable, reasonable.
Alert. The host has spotlighted your video for everyone.
You'd have a reasonable belief that your money's going to grow, but now you've got to take riskier gambles with your money, and it sucks. And then when it comes to the government spending, we talked about it earlier. What a lot of people don't understand is that what we now call the Department of Defense used to be called the Department of War. And from a marketing perspective, it sounds bad to say we have a Department of War. Our government, on our military, we spend more than the next 10 countries combined. And so whenever we talk about cutting government spending, the military is the easiest place to cut, but both sides are guilty of engaging in hyperbole whenever it comes time to cut anything. And so whenever you talk about cutting money from the military, you could cut a penny from the military, and you've got, Debbie Downers over here in both parties saying that we're going to get invaded by Guatemala and Honduras or something, right? So the reality is that you've got to be able to cut something. And with baseline budgeting, the way our government works is that every year, the following year, they spend more money that next year than did the previous year. So whenever we talk about cutting spending, they always talk about, well, we can't cut this, we can't cut that. Well, technically, you're never really cutting anything, because if, whatever government organization, whatever alphabet organization in the government, if they got $10 million this year, next year, let's call it 11 million. So when we talk about the conversations about cutting the government, cutting government spending, if you say, okay, instead of 10 million, you only get 10.5, in their minds, that's a cut, because I was supposed to get 11 million or 11 billion, but I only got 10.5 instead of 11. So that's a cut. That's not a cut. That's backwards math. A cut is if you got 10 million this year, you get 9 million next year or something. And across the board, if we could at least have the guts to do that, we could at least get somewhere, but we can't even get anywhere, because the second you want to cut something, everybody cries, what about the children? What about, the humpback, midgets at the board? I mean, come on, it's always something. There's always a reason to not do it. And so it's going to take some people to have a backbone and figure out, when you start cutting, somebody's going to get mad. They're going to have to deal with it, because again, it's like if you have a child and you give them an allowance, right, and you cut the allowance, they can cry all they want to, but the money's coming from me. It's going to be what it's going to be. You can be mad all you want to, but this is what's going to happen. And so when it comes to government spending, cutting the government spending, the American people have to just put their big boy and big girl pants on. Understand, we can't get out of this by just doing the same things. That's all I got to say.
Kevin,
Yes.
I was going to say, to his point, a lot of these people who get in the Congress came from positions as state and local politicians, where you have to balance the budget. They don't have the option of running huge debts and printing money to solve their obligations. They have some long-term financing projects for infrastructure, but as a general rule, they have to balance their budget every year. So why is it that can't be done at the federal level? It can't be because they don't have to. That's the only reason. And as long as this debt can grow and they can keep interest rates at peanuts, let's put it this way. Let's say the Treasury rate was zero and it was going to stay zero forever. Well, they could just borrow an infinite amount because there's no interest expense, right? But once an interest expense gets to be significant, it's a game changer. So, that's a lot of the game here, is just keeping interest down. But then, like I said earlier, what comes with that is, you lose half of your good investment pool, because now bonds and CDs and mortgage, collateralized mortgages are no longer good investments, because they don't pay much to begin with. And if interest rates do go up, they're going to lose value. So they're not attractive. And so what's happened is then you get everybody jumps to the stock market. The new acronym up there, and I don't know how new it is, but in New York is, TINA. There is no alternative to the stock market. And there is no alternative because the government has taken away the bond alternative, the bond and the CDs and the Treasury note rates and the mortgage-backed securities just don't pay. They don't pay rates. These pension plans, like these government pension plans, state and local, typically have an assumed return rate of between 6 and 8%. And that's where they make most of their money, is not on contributions by employees or by the local, state and local governments. It's on return on investment. So they're all pegged in at 6 to 8%. And guess what? If all you can get is 2% on a blue chip bond, it means you got to get like 10 in the stock market to get to your 6 to 8. Well, so, people are jumping in the stock market left and right. And so it's jacked up. Alan Greenspan used to talk about irrational exuberance. Well, that's what you're getting. But it's not so irrational when, there's a certain amount of money out there to be invested. And this piece over here is not attractive at all. So what does that mean? This other piece, the more and more money gets pushed into it, and the price goes up. It's like anything where there's a limited supply. You throw more money at it, and the price goes up. It's demand and supply. So
we're going to, Alan, we're going to come back to, we want to get these others in our first hour. Miss Jackie has something to say. Then Tim, you're going to come in and straighten us out. Miss Jackie, way up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You're back on the Liberty Show.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Thanks again for the opportunity, Kevin, Damien, and Tim Smith. I've listened to you. And now I think I'm only female on the panel, and I feel like a minority than a majority. Here's the thing. Give me about 5 or 10 minutes. Every time there is a national election, it is followed by the mid-year congressional election. Why? It's in the United States Constitution. After January 6, 2021, I talked to some old people about their impact on their lives. So, oh, we never had that. We had World War II, and they talk about that 24/7. But with my generation, what needs to be done with the parties is to make a one-party system. And to do that, you have to go in a committee on a capital level, go into a committee, make a resolution and vote on it. Bipartisan, one-party system is going to work. It's not a dictatorship. And I'll tell you why. After Hurricane Katrina, it really went down. Yes, 2005, when Louisiana got billions of dollars that went to the elite and not minorities. They got nothing. The elite people in that state got everything and then some more. That's where the downfall of the economy. You really have to take up courses in economy. I had 3 under my belt. So the sister knows what she's talking about. The problem with world economy is since the 80s, 1980s, the old century, the 20th century, that's where I'm at right now, has always been a downward spiral. And then with this new 21st century, it's a world economy merry-go-round. What we need to do, and I'm repeating CD, is the STEM program starting at the age of 12. Science, technology, engineering, math. Because 5 days a week, I look at Comcast Corporation. Ain't one American working there because Comcast stakeholders and the board of directors want it that way. Ain't one American. They're from foreign countries. So if we could pull the natural born citizens, and pull our money together to vote those crooks out of Comcast Corporation, it would allow students from Drexel, Temple, HBC colleges to have positions to do the Comcast work. But until that time, I'm supporting a one-party system. And number 2, encourage people on this panel to take a course in economics. Thank you for the opportunity.
I can't see. Come over here. Okay, great, Miss Jackie. That was some really good points. We're talking about government spending. So, Mr. Tim Smith, you're back on the Liberty Show. Then we have a special guest from all the way up in Seattle. Our friend Jay is back on. But Tim, bring us home.
Well, I want to give a great big shout out to Kevin Fortune, of course, the King of Liberty, to the Prince of Liberty, Damon. We heard his eloquent words, to Dr. Dana, and of course to our special guest, Alan Buckley. Tonight's show has caused me to be a little depressed listening to these people drone on about how bad it is to just freely print money. What we have to understand, and let's give context to this conversation. What we have to understand is that no matter what happens, we have a printer that prints money and it goes brr. So I propose that we continue to turn this printer on and print more money so that we can have awesome programs like this COVID lottery, or lotteries, I should say, because they're plural. There are multiple COVID lotteries that are taking place, once in the state of Maryland and once in the state of Oregon. So clearly, our finances as a nation are in order because we were able to dole out federal funds to these states so that they could have a lottery for folks who have yet to get their Rona shots. Now, these people chose not to get their Rona shots, but the state has, in their great infinite wisdom, has decided that, hey, to motivate these people who've already decided not to get their Rona shots, we're going to give them a lottery. Yes, you heard me correctly. There is a lottery that you are able, if you haven't received your Rona shot, to actually win cash prizes. Reading this, I came to the conclusion that since I already have my Rona shot and I'm ineligible to receive or a ticket to participate in these lotteries for folks who haven't received their Rona shots, And because we have a money printer that goes brr, clearly it's working and it's a thing that we can continuously go to. Inflation is not a real thing. Alan's just scaring the plebes and everyone else is scaring the plebes and, you know, trying to make us feel bad because we want our piece of the pie also. So I propose that since we have this money printer, that we have a lottery for individuals like myself who have gray and white cats. We don't want to have a lottery for people who have black cats because there are too many black cats already in this country, so that'd be too much weight. But people like me who have gray and white cats, we should have a lottery. And it should be, I'm thinking more like, you know, the Miss America pageant, where we have a pageant where we walk our cats down and whoever has the cutest cat wins $1 million. I'm just throwing that out there.
Mr. Till, thank you. But next, we're going to go to a very special guest, Mr. Jay. He's all the way from Seattle, Washington. We're going to talk about government spending. Jay, what do you have to say?
Well, we're talking about government spending.
Yes.
Okay. What all's been covered so far? We've been talking about in the federal, state context, federal spending. Okay. Well, so I'm really interested to see. I haven't read this new couple bills that are coming down the line out of the Biden administration. There's
Alert. The host has spotlighted your video for everyone.
Oh no.
Let's go ahead.
The computer says I'm in the hot seat. I hope the AI is going to look favorably on me. But yeah, you know, it really, when you talk about federal spending, it's a question of like, how do you prioritize your values, right? Like, because just like you as a person, you value your safety, you value your ability to have transportation, you value what you eat, what you do every day, right? And how you show those values is how you vote with your dollars, right? And the same thing is true as the federal government.
David McCurdy has left the meeting.
Oh no, he didn't like what I was saying. So, you know, the same thing is true. We're basically, whenever we set up the federal budget, we're saying, what are our values, right? And literally we get a quantitative assessment of those values in the federal budget. It's saying, okay, this is what we believe in. So for a long time, the federal government has been squeezed on either side. A Republican administration comes in, they cut taxes. A Democratic administration comes in, they increase spending, right? It just continuously increases the deficit. And so more and more what happens is the amount of our budget that goes to servicing that debt continues to increase, right? So I think in many ways what the Biden administration is proposing is wise in idea, right? But as per usual with the federal government, it's like, you know, just because you have a good idea about something doesn't mean it'll be well executed. You know, and when we talk about economics and we talk about spending, it's never in isolation. People talk about, well, NPR or this, that, and the other, it's too much money. It's too much money in comparison to what, right? We have peers, we have competitors, right? We from the Chinese, the Russians, they're laying down the investments to be successful in 2035. They're thinking with 100-year parameters, and a lot of people are hawkish on the long-term outlook for the CCP and for the Russians, but they're looking only through an economic lens. And just because there is a country that doesn't have a strong economic formula doesn't mean that they won't be a power player on the global scene. So I really look at the period that we're in right now as like, you know, a lot of comparisons and parallels to the 1918 Spanish flu, right? Then that leads into the period of prosperity as the Roaring 20s. And at the same time in the Roaring 20s, you had a lot of disparity between the haves and the have-nots. And, you know, one group of people is having a party, one people really isn't, and the things getting worse and worse, and that leads into the Great Depression, and then that especially into World War II. So I think, you know, really, if you look at a 10, 15-year perspective, unless something drastic change, unless we make drastic infrastructure changes like what the Biden administration is proposing, then when we get to these crunch points, when we get to these periods of negative growth and contraction, which isn't going to be the next 2 or 3 years, right? We're basically moving into a period of growth and prosperity. But because the economic cycles are cyclical in nature, there's going to be a downturn. The question is, are we going to be ready for it when it comes? So that's all I'd want to look for in the federal budget.
Thank you, sir. Now, he said we're moving into prosperity. I don't know. I'm going to move with him, because if he sees prosperity on the horizon, I'm going to move in with Jay. How are we going to have this prosperity if we just keep spending all the money? But Jay wasn't here earlier, and he's really into technology and all that. And one thing we did talk about, Jay, is that it's disturbing our country does not put enough into technology and robotics and all that stuff. That's where the Chinese and, they're putting their money in it. And the infrastructure would be fine, but just building a few roads and bridges is not going to save us from a collapse. We need to build robots. We need to build and do some stuff down here on the earth. We've been spending all this money up in the space, on Mars and places, and there's people down here starving. I mean, let's do something to keep people working, keep people, not just keep them working, but, to pursue our technology, to pursue our medicine and research and things like that. So the radio show part is over with. Now we can cuss each other out and all that good stuff. But anyway, any final comments before we close? Tim, you got something gangster to say?
I'm still waiting for everyone to agree that we should have a contest for gray and white cats, since we have money for everything else.
Just do what now? I missed you.
The cat contest. I'm waiting for people to get behind me on this idea that we should have a cat contest, a lottery for cats, since we have money for everything else.
Well, I want to ask you, why is it that we have money to spend trillions on everything? We have no money for reparations for slavery. Because why is that? Damon?
We already know why. Because
come on.
We already know why, because the system is not designed to care about the descendants of American slaves. Because the system was designed, as much as people don't want to admit it, the quote unquote founding fathers were not the founding fathers for Black people, right? They were the enslavers of our people. And so the country was literally built on their backs. And so anything that would kind of create restitution for that really kind of breaks at the mythology of what the American history is. And so if we had to address the original sin of America, which everybody will acknowledge that slavery is the original sin, but when it comes time to actually bring forth money about that, because the only thing this country knows is money, right? So if somebody does somebody wrong, what do people normally do? They don't just kind of walk off into the sunset and say, I got screwed. They take them to a court and they get damages, financial damages, to kind of prove, okay, a large corporation did something wrong. Here's the money to pay for that. Okay, cool. Now you can go your separate ways. But and when it comes to the idea of slavery in America, it was like, okay, y'all are free now, go about your very way. But what about the restitution to be paid? Again, that we got money for, Tupac said, we got money for wars, but can't feed the poor. And just in general, the country finds money for every other thing in the world it wants to do, except when it comes to Black people. And especially, Joe Biden right now, he's got everything for Asian Pacific Islanders. They're creating freaking, they're creating groups of people for everybody but Black folks. So Joe Biden coming up in here, hey, Black folks, you got me elected, but hey, let me pass this legislation for the Asians, which was based on a lie anyway, right? So the media was trying to create this narrative that Black folks are out here assaulting Asians. Okay, you probably have one or two mentally ill, homeless people assaulting an Asian. All of a sudden, we got legislation passed in no time. But how are Black people the face of hurting Asians when there literally was in the news, a white dude literally murdered some Asians, but Black folks are the face of murdering or hurting Asians? Okay, whatever.
Well, and it's interesting, because we're also, back to my point of, we're always like spending money, even with, we're so concerned about Israel and Hamas and them, but we're not as concerned about, what about our people here? Black people, white people are hurting in America. We talk about, the kids got to come across the border because the crime in Nicaragua and Costa Rica. What about the crime here? I just left Milwaukee. There were 10 shootings between Monday and Thursday before I left. But nobody wants to deal with that. But we're so concerned, and we're worried about people up on Mars. I don't care if there's life on Mars. What about the life down here on Earth? Tim, straighten this out. You're supposed to be the Prince of Liberty.
Well, for one, I don't see how we're going to involve the state in fighting crime. That's what got us into this problem now with policing. And this is my issue that I have with Black people. and our so-called Black elected officials. I can remember when I was a kid in the 90s, there was this cry that, oh, we've got to do something because of the crime. Well, the state did something. The state sent a bunch of cops to your neighborhoods. They occupied your neighborhoods. They beat on your sons. They beat on your daughters. They locked up your fathers. They locked up your mothers. They did something because you said something needed to be done. So I take a different stance when it comes to policing, when it comes to fighting crime. I don't believe that we should ask the state to help us with that, because the state only understands one thing, and that's force. To Damon's point, I'm going to differ again with my brother in Liberty. I don't see this as an issue with the system with reparations as much as I see it with Black elected officials, so-called Black leaders. These individuals that we have put forth as our so-called leaders, and the system has put forth as our so-called leaders, the common, in today's time, that would be Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and the leaders of Black Lives Matter.
I'm not laughing.
Those are all losers. These are all Uncle Toms. They do not have the interests of Blacks at heart. And Black folks have to get out of this mindset that we're going to grovel and ask the master and beg the master crumbs. This is why the Asians were able to actually win when it came to this whole we're being assaulted. I'm not trying to minimize the handful of Asians that were assaulted. Sure, that older lady, she got her face bashed in. I'm sure that hurt. But look at how their leadership used that situation. They literally told Biden, hey, we're not going to vote for any of your appointees until you decide to put more Asians in your cabinet. What the hell does Asians being in Biden's cabinet have to do with this older lady in New York who caught a beat down by, it appears to be, a mentally disturbed individual who was homeless? This is what separates groups of people who get things done from Black folks. Black folks, we've got to get out of this mentality that we're going to grovel and beg. Kevin and I had a conversation earlier today about the weed industry. How many Black people have been locked up behind possession of marijuana or smoking marijuana? Oh, we smelled marijuana in your car. The cops smell, oh, we smell marijuana. And this individual or these individuals get imprisoned because of marijuana. Now they come out of prison from these drug charges, and now there's a whole cottage industry around marijuana. What does Black leadership tell Black folks who were locked up behind marijuana? They tell them, tough cookies, too bad, if you wait a little bit, maybe we can work something out. We got to take a stand as Black individuals where we demand more from our elected officials. And not only do we demand more from our, and when I say more, I mean, we actually demand that they do something that's in our best interest. And not only that, we've got to take a stand against the system and put up a fight where we say that we're not going to take grabbing our ankles anymore, that we're not going to take taking it on the chin anymore, that we're not going to be this caricature of who we should be, where we're just asking and begging, well, please throw us some crumbs. So guess what? The system threw us some crumbs. So every time we talk about reparations, and I'm not being racist, but I have a lot of white conservative friends, just hung out with a bunch of them earlier today. What is it that they say when I bring up, oh, well, you know, reparations is a debt owed? It's not like we're asking for something that isn't acknowledged, that is due to us. The federal government acknowledged that this is a debt owed to Black people. What is it that white conservatives say? And it's not just white conservatives, the liberals do too. They say, well, you got welfare. This is the failure of Black leadership, and this is the failure of Blacks as a whole, is that we haven't taken note that what we, if we allow people to bend us over, guess what? They're going to bend us over, and they're not even going to ask us if we want any lube. My apologies.
Well, Tim, it wouldn't be yours if you didn't mention your favorite analogy. David and I sit here. Poor James is about to faint. You know, he's holy. He's a Southern Baptist or something. But yeah, you know, Tim brought up a lot of good points as normal. But guys, I'm really disturbed how politely and respectably that we're talking about this subject. I am very, now to Tim's point, I'm tired of getting screwed over and over. by the government, and we just sit there and take it. So my question now, what can we do? We keep voting these same idiots in. We keep making deals with the left, deals with the right. Neither one of them, uphold their contract. What can we do? So we're going to go back to Miss Jackie. Can you unmute Miss Jackie? There you go. We got you.
I'm writing notes. It's the mindset of the United States of America since World War II. It's stereotypes for minorities. And I'm talking about Dr. Dana and myself. We were educated to have a clean house, meals on the table, and clean laundry. Right, Dr. Bevan? We as minorities are now in legal positions. And I ain't talking about the vice president. Keep her out the mix. We have now went to school and got educated as minority to educate the people. The problem with the boat people all started with Richard Nixon. He allowed this to happen in the 70s. Remember those great big muscle cars? And what took over the muscle cars, Kevin? Yes, Toyota. Toyota. Okay? That's what took over the muscle cars like your Fords and Chevys. It was Toyota, in Japan, I believe. I know they still make Japanese engines for the Toyota. But it was during the 70s with former deceased Richard Nixon and the energy crisis with the gasoline. We couldn't get gasoline. Why? Because we leaned on Egypt to pump the oil into our nation. The ones in Texas were drying out, and STEM programs, which is science, technology, education, math, was not important. New century, 2021, we're still 20, 30 years behind with China and Russia when it comes to inventing new ideas for Americans and stop leaning on foreign countries like China. Oh yeah, we get that. You go to Macy's.com. China this, China that. We had factories, but thanks to President Richard Nixon and 16 years of congressional rule in the 80s with the Reagan-Bush administration, is why everything costs us more. It's not about COVID-19. Reparations, all I can say about reparations is the economics. And the economy with that in the South, like your Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia. When we got free slaves, they had to find other ways of keeping that economy going. And it didn't resolve the stereotype. You could lynch us 24/7. You still needed people to harvest the cotton and the corn and the Georgia peach. So when I do travel, there's been a turnaround. It's not minorities cleaning Holiday Inns or Lowe's hotels. It's the immigrants. Why? Because they don't fight for the minimum wage nationwide. Because they don't even speak the language. The Asians, they really don't speak the language. They got their own little mini economy, which we never learned.
That's true.
And I got 3 economic courses under my belt. So the sister knows what she's talking about. Thank you, Kevin.
Well, you brought up a really good point. And, like I said, we do all this crazy spending, but we're not investing in the right stuff. We need to be spending in science, technology. I mean, we need robots. We need to stay off of Mars and out of the Israelites and all of their wars and put some money in technology, robotics, things that are going to help make us a greater nation. And I agree with you. We just stopped, even our education. It's a joke. Schools are just a joke. Even college, Tim and Damon know how I feel. It's a joke. These kids can't read or write. They cannot speak English, to Ms. Jackie's point. And it's not just English for America, but English is the money language around the world. And
Tim Smith has joined the meeting.
It's just something. But we're going to go back to our special guest from Seattle, Mr. What's your name? What? Mr. Jay. Jay's back on the Liberty Show.
Okay, so so we're talking about a need for investment in STEM, and one thing I did before with Georgia State, they hosted a hackathon at Tech Square Labs, And we were working on for this hackathon was steam deserts, right? So we basically spent a weekend coding up how can we help penetrate STEM deserts, like basically like Bankhead, right? Places where like maybe not every kid has a computer, maybe not every third kid has a computer, maybe not 1 in 10 kids have a computer, right? And how do we end that? And the solution we approached was that we took building a mentorship network and something that you could put onto mobile applications for anything, right? For whether that's economics and finance, you might talk to Kevin, you know, whether that's building a computer or learning your code. So, you know, a lot of times we talk about depending on the federal spending or federal budget to increase STEM education. But for the most part, the stuff I learned and the things that got me out of, you know, living in a rough situation when I was a kid came from stuff you can find online, you know what I mean, in individual pursuit. So the question is like, how do we breed that fire and that quest for wanting to learn STEM? Because that's what it takes. You need a whole generation of people who want to do it, right? The guy who did DGI in China, like he was not waiting on the CCP to tell him, okay, you're going to be a drone guy. He wanted to do it. He wanted to inspire an entire generation to become roboticists and pursue it. So that's something we talk about a lot, is how do we inspire that into people, and how do we get into, especially just like, you know, especially when we talk about reparations, right? If we're sitting around waiting for the federal government to vote for it, like obviously the GOP is going to veto it every time. So something I look for, and the people I talk with, we look for is how do you do that in your own way, right? And for me, that's one thing I'm always interested in. If anybody who's listening to this, you have an opportunity for pro bono, I'm always interested in getting into the community and introducing kids to science and technology in a way that's approachable, and how can we get them inspired and fired up? You know what I mean? Because that's what it's going to take. It's on us. We're waiting for the federal government to do it. It's never going to happen. Right. You know what I mean?
Anything? Well, guys, anything else? Okay, we've had another good show with the Liberty Show with Kevin Fortune. And did you want to close? You want to close us out, Will, up in New York?
I don't have a whole lot that has been said already. Really good show. Thanks everyone for coming out. Yeah, just the money printer keeps on going burn no matter what we say, is really what it comes down to. And yeah, we need to stop that.
Carlton has left the meeting.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Have a good night.